All right, so this is the Resilient Landscaping, Sustainability in the Defensible Space and Beyond workshop. And the workshop is a 4-part series. We did part 1 on October 1st. That one was Sustainability in the Defensible Space and Beyond. That was presented by Eric. And then part 2, Defensible Space Zones and Code Requirements. That was Mimi. And October 15th, last week, Firewise Design with the Defensible Space Zone. I think that was April, right? Okay, perfect. I wasn't here last week. And then today, part 4, October 22nd, Maintenance in the Defensible Space Zone. Each workshop is accompanied by myself. I'm Roberta McIntyre, President and CEO of Fire Safe Sonoma, the county's countywide Fire Safe Council. And I'll wait for Julie to get caught up. Okay. Oh, just so you're aware, this is a webinar. You don't have audio or video activated. We are recording the webinar, so be aware of that. And we're going to take questions from the Q&A. You'll see on the bottom of your screen, there's a ribbon with a Q&A and a chat. We will be dropping things from time to time in the chat that are informational, or if you have information to share with the group, go ahead and drop those in the chat, but we'll be pulling the questions from the Q&A in the webinar feature. So if you think of a question, put it in the Q&A right away. Don't wait until we open it up for the Q&A period. That way you won't forget, or and then we'll see it as we go. And as we handle questions, we'll try to, if we see duplicative questions, we'll kind of lump them together as we go. Okay, and so with us today is myself. I mentioned myself already. Also with us today from the Habitat Corridor Project is April Owens and Jennifer Roberts. And then with us from the Sonoma Ecology Center is Eric Scholes. I don't see Caitlin here with us today. Ellie is here with us today, and Rachel Bean is here with us today. And from the UC Master Gardener Program, we have with us Mimi Enright and Jennifer Roberts. Those folks and those organizations make up what we call the Resilient Landscape Coalition. And check out the websites. We have a lot of good information there. We're dropping that in the chat as well. And then also remember that this webinar series is funded through a grant from Sonoma County Ag and Open Space. They have, for the last few years, done a grant program using funds from a PG&E settlement to go towards wildland fire safety and risk reduction. And they're so graciously providing the funding for this set of workshops. And then also we're helped out by CAL FIRE and local fire departments in the creation and delivery of all these materials. And again, check out the websites for more information. With that, I will hand it over to our subject matter experts to kick this off, and I am going to go dark.
All right. Thank you, Roberta. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I am Jennifer Roberts, and I will be speaking about landscape maintenance in the Defensible Space Zone. So I'm going to start out with just a quick recap of what is defensible space. I know we've talked about this each week, but that's just in case someone's joining us just for this program, or it's just good to have a review. And then I'm going to talk about the different maintenance practices for overall plant health, and with a slight focus on the fall. And I'm going to cover pruning, mowing, mulching, irrigation, and composting. And then I'm going to take another close look at maintenance practices in each defensible space zone, but that information is also woven into all of these 5 things that I talk about. And then I will share a couple extra resources, and then of course the Q&A at the end. All right, so you have seen this slide before if you've joined us previously, But this fire behavior triangle is an important thing to keep in mind, especially as we move to talk about maintenance. So in order to have fire, we need three things. We need a certain type of weather, topography, and fuel. So thinking about, we can't really change the weather, right? Depending on how much wind we're getting, what the temperatures are like, how much humidity we are having, and how much precipitation we've had recently, or even over the course of a year, right? Weather, we can't change it. Topography, also hard to change, and that's the slope or aspect of the land. But the thing we can control is fuel. So that's why we're here today. We can control the amount of fuel, the arrangement of fuel, and how much moisture that fuel has. So when we talk about fire, there are three main ways that fire behaves coming towards structures. So when there's a fire, there are embers flying through the air, and these things can be very dangerous because if they land on combustible material, they can start many, many small fires or that can become larger fires. So we are always thinking about embers when thinking about our landscape and how we take care of it. So here we see embers demonstrated starting many small fires. The next way that we think about fire behavior is combustibility through radiant heat. So here, this outbuilding has caught fire, and that fire is so hot that it is lighting the next structure on fire, and that can continue on and perpetuate a fire's existence. And the last way that we talk about fire is a direct flame. So this is like that wall of fire that's coming through a landscape or an area and setting everything in its path on fire. And I think we mostly think about this last fire behavior. But as we've talked about previously, it's truly embers that cause the majority of structure fire during a wildfire event. So we always need to take that into consideration. And the first thing we always say is you should work to harden your home, but then work out into the landscape. And that's what we've been focusing on through these 4 parts. So a mini review. What is defensible space? That is the area around your structures that is from 0 to 100 feet, going outwards from the home or any structure that attaches to the home, or any outbuildings you have on your property. And defensible space is split into 3 zones. The first one being zone 0, which is 0 to 5 feet away from structures. And we call that the ember defense zone. So closest to the home. And we remember we want to have no organic mulch near our structures if possible. The next zone is zone 1. That's 5 to 30 feet, also called the lean, clean, green zone. And this is where we get to have groupings of plants, hopefully separated by non-combustible pathways or materials. And we can have larger groupings of plants in this zone. And then the last zone is zone 2, the 30 to 100 feet, the reduced fuel zone. So we can have even larger groupings of plants and larger plants themselves and potentially more trees. But we'll talk about how to care for our trees, right? We want to keep our trees. All right, so when thinking about any maintenance program for your property, the first steps is, as we've talked about previously, you should always be considering your personal risk. Every home and landscape is unique, and they need to be considered individually. So the way to do that is to walk your property, sit in your yard, and observe your garden seasonally. So you want to be asking questions like, how much rainfall do I get in a certain year? How much wind do I get given the different seasons? Did I see pollinators this year? Which ones? Was it more or less than last year? When I have a rain event, how does water move through or over my property? Is there places where it pools Or are there places that seem to be very dry? What kind of soil do I have? All of these questions come into planning the best garden you can have and then learning how to properly take care of it. So you want to determine your individual maintenance needs in at your own home, your own little corner of the world, and be thinking about that in long-term ways and in short-term ways. So one thing we always say is that you should be putting the right plant in the right place. So if you are going to be planting new plants or inheriting a garden or taking care of a garden you've had for years, you always want to be assessing if the plants that are there are the right plant for your area. Now, that could mean what you see here on the left, this picture with the tree. This tree was planted too close to this home. So we start running into problems. The first problem might be that this tree is dropping a lot of leaf litter right onto the roof, right into the gutters. And we've learned that that's not good for fire resiliency, especially if we're not cleaning it out. But the other big problem is that its structural integrity is compromised because it is so close to the home. It's leaning to one side, its roots are not allowed to get to their full potential, and neither is its branches. So this is one example of maybe the right plant, but it's in the wrong place. And then in contrast, though, on the right, you see a couple different types of plants planted, and they're given the right space, not just from each other, but there's actually room for someone who's maintaining that garden to get in and do the proper maintenance. Those grasses need to be cut back so someone can walk around them, not trample the garden. So it's well designed. Now, this is just one type of design, right? There's also a more crowded aesthetic, but this is just an example that there is a right plant to put in the right place. And it's your job or our job to determine those needs. And good design allows for easy maintenance. That's our goal. So it's fall in Sonoma County. It's a gorgeous time of year, although it's hard to have a bad day in Sonoma County. But the weather right now, we've had some very hot days, some record hot days. And I think somehow we always seem to forget that our hottest times can come in September or October. But we are getting cooler nights, even when we get that heat. And we have had some sustained winds. We've had gusty winds, right, with the red flag warning, which we had last week. So we can be in our greatest fire danger at this time of year, and that is becoming more and more the case, it seems. Then all of that dryness hopefully gives way to cooler and more overcast days, and then eventually, hopefully, we get our first rains, which we did have a small rain event already. So fall is, an interesting mix. And the plants are doing some growth, some seed germination, right? You might see the California poppies starting to pop up. And they are beginning their time of root growth. So we talk about planting in the fall because plants, especially those native to California, do their majority of root growth during the fall and winter months. And some plants you might see blooming, really depends where you are in the county, but you might see buckwheat, monkey flower, definitely the sages, poppies are popping or coming back. California fuchsia is still holding on, maybe yarrow, and coyote bush. Honeysuckle is probably done, depends. But like I said, fall is for planting, and that's exciting if you're a plant nerd like most of us in this group. But fall is also for reaping the harvest, keeping plants properly hydrated. So again, thinking about this weather time, we had very low humidity recently with winds, so we need to be responding appropriately and giving our plants supplemental water. Fall is also a time for pruning and preparing the soil. So that means maybe adding compost, maybe replenishing the recommended amount of mulch. And it's also a time for collecting seed. So let's talk more about those maintenance practices for plant health. We're going to talk about pruning, mowing, irrigation, mulching, and composting. And I'm going to speak to these actions in terms of what you should be doing regularly, what you can be doing on an annual basis, and what we need to be doing and thinking about long term. So starting with pruning, the basics. So pruning is definitely an art and a science. There are some scientific things to know about why we make cuts the way we do or where we make them. But what I love about pruning is it's also a kind of creative experience. You get to look at plants in their form or, play with them, maybe change their form. The most extreme example of that is bonsai or topiary, which we're not talking about tonight and not doing in our native plant garden, but think of it more as an art, and then it can be more fun. So we prune for vigor, health, and safety. And we are always trying to maintain the integrity and balance of a plant. The easiest thing to come in and do and think about when pruning is taking out any dead, dying, or diseased plant parts, or anything that might be crossing, any limbs that are crossing each other and maybe causing friction and not, letting a plant get to its full healthy potential with air circulation. And anytime we're pruning, we want to work with clean and sharp cutting tools. So fall and winter are a good time to work on those tools if you haven't done it in a while. And when pruning, we want to go slow. We want to step back and always be asking, why am I making this particular cut on a plant? You should have a reason for it. When thinking about pruning for fire safety, we have some goals to consider. The first is horizontal spacing. Now, I know we talked about this before, but you want to be thinking about that spacing in the horizontal space between shrubs and trees, or shrubs and roof overhang, etc. And then, I'm sorry, I'm flipping these. And then vertical spacing is the up and down area that we want to be considering. Horizontal spacing is the side to side spacing that we want to be considering. And I have graphics later that depict it a little better. We always want to be removing any dead material. And you can do that any time of year. That won't harm the plant. So you see here, this shrub or bush has been sheared along the side. And it was likely done with a tool like this, a shearing tool, that just indiscriminately makes cuts as you move it across. And the problem with this is it promotes a lot of spindly, weak growth just at the very tips of the plant. And you can see when you dig down not that deep, you see all this dead woody material. And then on top of that, this shrub is accumulating extra leaves from, around the neighborhood or whatever. So this is becoming quite the fire hazard. So instead of shearing materials like that, we want to think about thinning or making thinning cuts to a plant. And I'll talk more about that. I have more examples. And we also prune to rejuvenate plants. So here is a redbud, Western redbud tree or shrub. And you see how this is dense in the before picture. And then afterwards, selective cuts have been made to create more of an openness and maybe even, a more beautiful shape to this tree. So when it is in flower, you appreciate the shape of the tree and the flowers better. We want to prune also to eliminate fuel laddering. So we talked about that before, but that's keeping the distance from lower plants away from the tree canopy or from the ground to the beginning of the tree canopy. So you want to keep lower plants 3 times the understory height or away from the understory height. So for example here, let's say you have a 2-foot shrub. So 3 times the 2-foot shrub is 6 feet. So you want to have 6 feet of space between the top of the shrub and the bottom of the tree. because we want to eliminate this type of fire behavior, where if these are too close and you have a flame burning, then a low burning, maybe grass fire that has less intensity can get into tree canopies and very quickly become a much more higher intensity and more dangerous fire event. So thinking of this spacing. Here is an example in the real world. So here we have a juniper bush growing around this tree and it being close to the lower branches. So the maintenance work was done to clear space from the tree trunk and then also clear space from the lower branches. So you're eliminating ladder fuel potential. And then also a closer look, you can see within the juniper bush, which is notorious for getting dead woody material inside, it's also been cleaned out. So these are the kind of maintenance practices you want to be thinking about. You also want to eliminate vines from trees or structures. There is a house in there. And here, this could be a house or a fence. So looking at these very dense vegetative areas without, any breaks in the material, and you have ladder fuels, things that can go from the ground upwards. These are all very dangerous situations to be in. Another thing to think about for pruning spacing. So just remember, fire travels faster when it moves uphill. So the more of the slope that you have on your property, you want to have bigger spacing between trees. So that's what these diagrams are showing. So for 10 feet or a less than 20% slope, you want to have 10 feet between trees. And then if you have over a 20% slope, it's ideal to have 20 feet between trees. Now, these are ideal recommendations. Again, we know this is not the real world, but this is something that we can, over many years, try and get to this goal. So you want to increase your space, the steeper the slope. That's all this is saying. Now, for pruning shrubs, there are herbaceous perennials, which are not woody, and there are shrubs that are woody. Now, for both of these, you can remove dead or diseased plant material any time of the year, and it can be a good idea to cut back these plants every 2 to 3 years to reduce that old woody growth in the shrubs. And as I mentioned, shearing creates that dead woody inside. We just left the summer season, although that's kind of debatable with the weather, but many of our natives, such as manzanitas, toyon, and ceanothus, are best pruned or thinned in the summer months, but then some can also be pruned after flowering in the spring. And sages should be deadheaded throughout the summer and fall. So once they're done flowering, you can prune sage. A couple other, this again shows that pruning technique that I was saying is thinning. So here you have a dense canopy, and then coming in to make selective cuts, you have a less dense canopy. So that can be better for fire resilience. This is an important technique to know, and it can help control the size and shape of a given plant. It helps develop a tree's natural beauty, as we've seen, and also something to consider is it can be beneficial to thin, or we say limb up, take lower branches off, limb up, a large shrub to create a tree form. So it's another way to, protect that low line. If there's a fire coming through that's low, if things are higher up, less chance for combustibility into a canopy. Another few notes about pruning trees. We should always consult a licensed arborist if it's a very large tree, definitely if it's a heritage tree. So some of our oaks are considered heritage trees, so you definitely want to work with a professional, and you should never try to prune trees that are near electric lines. That is for the professionals. But if we have other trees Some recommendations are to remove lower limbs 6 feet up from the ground, or a third of the height of the tree if it's over 30 feet tall. And that's so we are avoiding those fuel ladders. And county code requires at least 10 feet distance of branches from chimneys or stovepipes. When pruning trees, timing is important, and it depends on the type of tree and what your goal is. So fruit trees are often pruned in the dormant season, which for most of them is winter. Pines, we prune in December, January. Deciduous oaks, prune in winter. Evergreens, evergreen trees are in early spring or midsummer. And evergreen oaks are July through October when they are dormant. Trees can overhang the roof, but we want to keep a distance of 6 feet from that roof. And very, very important, maintain that leaf litter year round. And another note, we do not want to top trees. It's not a healthy thing to do for the tree. It can kill the tree. And if it doesn't kill it, it really compromises the integrity of the tree. So here you can see the example, the top has been taken off of this tree, likely because of its involvement with the power lines. Here, again, another topping, and this is another kind of pruning technique that can happen, but it really stresses the tree out. And you see this spindly little growth that the tree puts out as a reaction. So it's not a healthy system to get into. So we don't recommend it. Instead, we want to work with thinning and maintain the integrity and balance. Other pruning techniques, especially for shrubs, deadheading, we recommend. So as blooms die, just cut back the blooms. Easy enough. And it revigorates the plant, and you can often get an even longer bloom season by doing this. Penstemon and monkeyflower respond really well to this. But it is something to consider to keep some dead seed heads for reseeding, and of course for wildlife. Many birds are out there looking for seed. And then thinning, this is another example of thinning, before and after. Another thing you can do for pruning is cutting back a plant hard. Now, not all plants by any means can take this, but Epilobium, Muhlenbergia, or deergrass, and coyote brush can all withstand this. This is coyote brush. This plant can get, kind of craggly. Sometimes it can have dieback or get disease. And if any of that happens, you can just come in and prune it back very hard, and it will push new growth. And see how it looks like it was falling over, or, just weird growth, and all the new growth is coming back upwards. Coppicing is another thing. This is where you're cutting at one trunk, and coyote brush and toyon can handle this. This is not like a common thing, but I'm just throwing it in there so you're aware of it. And I do have links for special pruning situations or special plants that need, a certain way of pruning or can handle something. If you're really looking at, you have large shrubs and you want to take them back, cut them back hard for fire resilience. And all the links are in the chat, or we'll send all the links again. So when pruning and making a specific cut, here's some technique notes. You want to cut above a bud. So here's a little bud. You want to make sure you're not cutting off the bud, or you won't get the next season's flower or next branch. So above the bud, and you want to make sure you're making flush cuts. So not ripping cuts, or not, you want a good, nice, sharp cut. And a lot of plants like a 45-degree angle, and that has to do with moisture. Like, you don't want moisture sitting on top of the cut. So also it depends the time of year you're doing this. That could be more or less important. And you don't want to leave stubs. So like this, or too much stub, you could get a bad growth pattern, or it could die back. And wound dressing is not necessary in most cases. Okay, so that was pruning. Now we're going to talk about mowing. We should only use a mower before 10 a.m. during dry weather. Many fires get started from using power tools at the wrong time of year, the wrong time of day. So remember, before 10 a.m. And do not mow at all if it's windy or excessively hot and dry, especially not during a red flag warning day. Hot engines can ignite dry grass, and you should always have a water supply and a fire extinguisher close at hand. So it's nice to have those things there, or a plan if something does get out of control. And do not mow also on the flip side if the ground is saturated, because you're going to be creating divots in the land and you don't want to, hurt the soil any more than we have to. And if you're mowing in the spring, or especially if you're doing that first pass after the rains and the winter, it's a good idea to walk around and survey for birds, because we do have ground nesting birds here in California, and we don't want to disturb them or run into them with a mower, whether it's scaring them or something more drastic. So please be mindful. When we mow, if we have a large property or area that gets, a lot of like grass, but hits a lot of our invasive weeds, we want to try and stay ahead of the weeds. But our main goal is to prevent the seed formation, right? All of these are tiny little seeds that can all become new plants. So we want to, what we call it, reducing the seed bank, or reducing how many seeds are out there on the land. We want to remove any invasive or high risk plants. So high risk meaning they can dry out and turn to a fire hazard, or high risk, this burr clover can become, it's a problem if it gets in our pets or animals' fur, or us. It's not fun to step on when those mature. And we want to mow or trim grasses and weeds to 4 inches in the spring and summer, and 6 inches next to roadways. If you have a lawn and you're mowing that, you can leave your grass clippings on top of the lawn. You don't have to collect them, bag them up, put them in the green cart, hopefully. You can leave them on your lawn. This is a method called grass cycling, and it helps keep the fertilization right there. You don't have to add as much fertilizer to keep your lawn healthy. Doing this prevents nutrients to your soil. It helps retain the soil's moisture and keeps green waste hopefully out of the landfill, but hopefully we're not doing that. And a string trimmer presents less risk than a mower for starting a fire. And then even less risk is considered using electric machines. Now they have all kinds of landscape machinery in electric form, so look out for that. Now, mulching. We've talked a lot about mulch already through this series, but a mulch is anything that can cover the soil, and it can be organic or inorganic. So meaning it could have been once alive or not alive. So examples of organic mulch are wood chips, or we call that arbor mulch, straw, coconut fiber, leaf litter, grass trimmings, and compost are all organic mulches, and then stones and gravel are inorganic mulches. And there's many benefits to mulch. We should be using mulch, but we've talked about the different ways to use it, certain kinds close to the house, other kinds further away. But mulch benefits include water conservation, preventing soil compaction, preventing erosion, reducing dust, suppressing weeds, visually enhancing our landscape, and potentially cooling the soil. Not all mulches cool the soil, but a good handful of them do. And organic mulches can also improve the soil tilth and feed our soil life. So if you have, not good soil tilth, and you can't reach your hand in and dig into that soil, or you feel like you have a dead soil, there's not a lot going on, organic mulch is the way to revitalize it for a healthier garden. Now, our arbor mulch or composted wood chips we've talked about is our recommendation for fire resiliency from 5 feet out to 100 feet. This is the type of mulch to choose, and that's according to a study that was done in 2008, where the arbor mulch produced very little flame and had the slowest rate of fire spread. So they compared 8 types of mulch. And it should be applied 2 to 3 inches deep and use a composted mulch. So a mulch that has been sitting out, exposed to elements or exposed to water, and has been turned over time. Mulching in the 0 to 5. Remember, we want non-combustible, non-organic materials like stone, gravel, brick, pavers, or concrete. And here's a beautiful way to do that. You might hear these materials and think, oh, I don't know, but I think this is a gorgeous way. And April showed us other inventive ways that she's worked with these materials. Arbor mulch is acceptable in the 5 foot to 30 foot zone. So moving away from the home. And you can use arbor mulch within your planting. So it's not just for pathways, of course. It's, surrounding your plants, covering all the soil in the different islands of plantings that we create. Now, I said cover all the soil. If you have ground nesting bees, then leave a space of bare soil for them. Don't cover everything with mulch. But we want to break up large areas of mulch with non-combustible pathways in this 5 to 30 foot zone. So don't just come in and have a whole swath of mulch, have something breaking it up. Or here you see many ways of breaking up the material. We want to avoid fine shredded bark like redwood or cedar. This is what it looks like. It's also called gorilla hair. We've talked about it. And also avoiding shredded rubber, pine needles, and cedar. They have the highest hazardous combustion characteristics and are not recommended. Leaf litter. Now, leaf litter is important. It's nature's natural cycle where leaves drop. They provide nutrients for the soil below and for whatever tree. And they also protect and feed the soil. They're also a home for overwintering pollinators. Pollinators can lay their eggs there. So if we don't have leaf litter, we might be getting rid of the next generation of pollinators. So leaving leaf litter is a good idea, but always go back to your personal risk assessment. If you're in a high fire severity zone, maybe leaving leaf litter during fire season isn't the best choice. And you can remove that and compost it. But if you're in a wetter part of our county, you have the opportunity to keep more leaf litter. And of course, it breaks down over the seasons and slowly feeds the plants. Irrigated native grasses can also be used as a covering or, a way to play on or whatever in the 5 to 30 foot zone. Irrigation. Proper irrigation will keep plants hydrated and less flammable. That's our goal. But we want to avoid excess watering. Of course, we still want to conserve water. California will always experience periods of drought. So even if we have a lot of rain in one year, we still need to be conserving water. We also don't want to overwater because that can cause excessive growth of plants that will just require thinning or maybe even removal. Too much water can kill plants, especially a lot of our natives that have grown to be adapted to our summer dry climate. Spring and fall are the times to change your settings on your irrigation controllers. So we're moving into that time where we're going to have to scale back our automatic watering, if we have an irrigation system. To get the best irrigation program going for your plants, you need to get to know your plants, and you want to determine their thirstiness. So you want to think about how much sun exposure they get, what kind of slope they're on, how much wind, what species they are, what season it is, and how mature these plants are. And the easiest way to do that is you can look up what plants you have using this website as a resource that's called WUCLS for short, or Water Use Classification of Landscape Species. And it classifies all plants if they use high water or have high water usage, moderate usage, low, or very low. And so you can, if you're trying to reduce water, then choosing all very low water use plants is your best bet. Natives, like I said, are adapted to our summer dry climate, but newly planted natives need more water. This is something that new gardeners or people who are just starting to work with natives sometimes can struggle with, because it takes 1 to 3 years for new natives to establish. So it's a good idea to check in weekly when you first plant a native garden, especially in the summertime, especially in a week of over 95-degree heat. And natives actually enjoy deep but infrequent watering. And many natives actually drink the most in the winter, adapted to our climate. So if we have a dry winter, you definitely want to be checking your soil and watching your natives and how they are looking. And one way to do that is with a moisture meter like this. When we talk about irrigation, we're talking about drip. As April covered, we might be doing a grid of drip, or we might be talking about sprinkler system. But no matter how you're watering your plants, you always want to be thinking about the root zone, not just right where the plant is planted and like what's right around the stem. You want to think about the zone of the roots, and they're always going to be expanding out and always changing. So that's the better way to monitor your plant's irrigation needs. We've talked about it before, but slow it, spread it, sink it is our goal for water. We want to allow water to infiltrate on our landscapes. We want to slow any rain event, let it sink in and recharge not only our garden, but the groundwater. And if we do this in an effective way, then we need less irrigation overall. We want to always be encouraging water to stay on site. So different ways to do that include creating swales, keeping permeable surfaces when possible, using mulch, and adding compost. And speaking of compost, compost has the ability to hold 3 times its weight in water. So that's one of the easiest ways to help water sink in and stay on our property. In order to make our own compost, we can place food scraps and yard debris in a green bin, or a backyard pile, or even a worm bin. And it is now the law, actually, that everyone has to compost in some way in California, but that can mean just using your curbside green bin. And compost is beneficial because it provides nutrients to our gardens. It helps retain water, and of course, improves our soil tilth. We want to try to keep organic matter that we create on our property if possible. So doing it ourselves is fun and beneficial. We can add to compost piles year-round, but we want to keep piles or bins away from structures. So we don't want to have these things in our 0 to 5 foot zone, and maybe not even in our 5 to 30 if given the option, right? So keeping those away from structures and keeping them properly hydrated and turned. Turned meaning turning over the material with a pitchfork or shovel and keeping them oxygenated is the goal. It can be made and spread year-round, but it's best to spread in the fall before the rain. But do note, be careful with natives. A lot of our natives are adapted to live in our California soils, which are generally poor in nutrients. So with natives, you don't need to keep adding tons and tons of compost. It might be just a good idea to give a refresh every once in a while, or if you're starting a new garden. All right, special precautions to take during the high risk time. So the red flag warning we just had, if that is issued, we've gotten a lot better, I think, about issuing them further ahead in the future. So that gives us time to prepare. So we want to think about placing any objects that might be within our 5-foot zone to a place outside of that zone. So that can include trash cans, deck furniture, potted plants, mats, tools, or brooms. Move them away from structures. And we want to be checking our roof and gutters for debris, like any leaf litter. We want to review the zone 1 to assure there is no accumulated debris or dry or dead plant material, and potentially give plants an extra soak to assure they're fully hydrated. And we definitely don't want to be mowing or using gas-powered tools during this time. A little bit of a review on maintenance practices by each zone. So in the 0 to 5, remember that's minimal plants and other combustible materials. We want to remove weeds and debris from this zone, including under our deck, like here. Removing clutter, firewood, checking gutters and the roof, and ensuring adequate irrigation. For zone 1, the 5 to 30-foot zone, again, keeping plants well hydrated and free of debris. Pruning plants for that horizontal and vertical space. Mowing or removing dead grass and weeds. And maintaining organic mulch to no more than 2 to 3 inches deep. Zone 2, 30 to 100 feet out. Plants are maintained just like they are in zone 1, but larger plants and groupings are more appropriate. You want to collect fallen branches or other debris and mow or remove dead grass and weeds. And zone 3, which is that beyond the 100-foot zone, the surrounding wildlands, it's a good idea to learn to recognize our native and invasive species. So knowing the difference will make you a better steward of the beyond lands. And it's also a good idea to not modify vegetation without expert help or educating yourself on what you're dealing with. And you can seek advice from a restoration or forestry professional if necessary. And we did have questions about, how do I choose a landscape maintenance professional? What should I be looking for? So you can ask people about their firewise training or knowledge, see if they have any, or ask about familiarity with California native plants. And if they don't have this knowledge, you can provide them with written materials that we have created, we being the Resilient Landscapes Coalition. So we've put together a brochure or send them to our website or any of the websites of any of the 4 organizations that make up the Resilient Landscapes Coalition. We each have information they could benefit from. And we have a recorded training specifically geared for landscape professionals that's on our YouTube channel. So this is the same YouTube channel that will have all these videos that we've been recording. And there should be links in the chat now for our YouTube and our brochures. Once again, our website and other resources that are available. So we've talked about many of these sources I used for my presentation. And one last bid, please fill out our survey that we will send to you, asking about all 4 parts of this workshop, asking your opinion about what you thought was valuable or how we could improve. So that you'll see in about 4 to 6 weeks to the email that you used to sign up for this workshop. So please fill that out for us. And with that, I want to say thank you for your time tonight. And now we will switch over to Q&A.
All right, Jennifer, that was really good. I'm gonna be selfish and open it up with the question I have. What's the difference between deciduous and evergreen oaks?
Certain species of our oaks keep their leaves all year, and some of them drop their leaves. So coast live oaks, which are the oaks with kind of small leaves and they have little pricks on the end of the leaves generally, they keep their leaves all year, and other types drop them.
I think the oaks I have are evergreen then. So most of these questions are you guys. I don't think I'll be able to answer one of them, so this will be fun. How do we find good sources for free arbor mulch from tree companies? Can you guys maybe drop companies in the chat if you know of any?
I think a grab and grow isn't free, but it's very inexpensive. I don't know of any free sources because you really want it composted and heated up. So those wood chips that come from just any of the tree companies could have anything in them. So I would go to a company like Grab and Grow that actually keeps the weeds out.
Yeah, up in Lake County where I live, up on Quackenbush, they have a site where they grind up people's stuff. And I mean, if you heard the term dirt cheap, I mean, their topsoil materials and mulch are just literally dirt cheap. It's crazy how inexpensive it is.
There's nothing like approaching an arborist working in your neighborhood and asking them to dump the chips on your property, and often they're happy to do so rather than haul it off. So make friends with your local tree companies.
Yeah, if you're looking specifically for wood chips too, for sure. Yeah, okay. So Mike writes, we have blue barrels for rain capture, and those are on cinder blocks and gravel with 2x4 borders to hold the gravel. They have overhang of 4 to 6.5 feet with vertical wooden supports. Could it be painted with fireproof paint? I'm not sure what he means there, but I'll take a crack at that. So I do structural hardening. I think if you want to protect the wood and with some fire resistant paint, not a bad idea. It'll certainly reduce your risk. I hope that answers the question.
Mike has added that there were 2 questions. I'm not sure what the second question is there. Mike, maybe you could expand on what your second question is in the Q&A.
This is a question that keeps coming up all of a sudden in my world with having rainwater capture in the 0 to 5. So typically we've designed it this way before fire resilient landscapes. And so Roberta, I'm so curious, like what you think about having rain capture these plastic containers in the 0 to 5. I mean, do we need to move those away?
They're plastic, they are combustible. I call plastic a frozen flammable liquid because when it gets hot enough to melt, the liquid plastic acts like a flammable material. If they're full of water, less of a hazard. But reducing, your risk would involve moving those outside the 0 to 5, but then you have the issue of, moving your downspouts over there, etc. Wood or metal, 55-gallon drums for metal, like cattle troughs would work probably better because they're not combustible. And actually, now that I think about it, those metal cattle troughs could be you could do some architectural stuff with those to make them look really cool. As opposed to the plastic tubs, the carboys is I think what you're talking about. Well, let me jump down to Andrew's question. What can one do when PG&E tops trees? I know. What do you guys think about let's reach out to PG&E's Vegetation Management Division and see if we can bring this material to them. Because honest to goodness, I can empathize. It feels like, they're just cutting around the distance of the conductors that they're supposed to do and leaving the stuff. Any thoughts on that? We have a PG&E member, a PG&E employee on our Fire Safe Sonoma board. I would love to see us get this material in front of their contractors. All right.
I don't know, do any of you all have experience with how to try to rejuvenate a topped tree? I've not dealt with that before.
Oh, good question.
Tough issue.
Yeah, can you bring them back, or can
I think there's some trees that can live through that, like live oaks and deciduous oaks. But I've been driving around the county and I always think like, what happened here? Why is this giant tree? And then it's like the squirrels. So like it just like the squirrels dump they're running along the top of the line, the bottom lines, not the PG&E lines, but they drop all their little acorns, and then the oaks grow up, and then PG&E has to slice them into these weird shapes. So oaks seem to be able to do better than maybe redwoods or other trees that have. Jennifer, what's that name when it's all of you? I'm spacing on the name when it has a central leader kind of running up, like a redwood or a pine.
I'm gonna jump to the next question. I don't know if Jennifer's gonna answer it. So Lindsay writes, what is it? Oh, sorry. Lindsay writes, do heritage oaks need to be pruned every year?
My understanding is no. And in fact, most oaks don't need to be pruned. There could be different reasons for needing to. We had a big rain event this last year, so a couple of my deciduous oaks really pushed growth, got very heavy, and they had branches that were low and into the road space, where in years before they hadn't been. So we need to prune the oaks, but it's definitely not an every year thing.
Yeah, I think the general recommendation is to take a look at some thinning and cleaning out any dead branches on your trees like every couple of years. It's definitely, I think it's an annual activity that's recommended. Eric, is that where you have something?
Yeah, I've seen 2 to 3 years on average. And I wanted to just pedal back to the if you cut the lead, if you have another strong branch coming from the ground, like it'll grow, but it's never going to grow back from that space. So it depends on if something doesn't mind being shrubby. So if it's underneath power lines, that's probably okay. It's not going to grow up as tall, but if it's something like a redwood, it'll probably never be complete. But yeah, back to this.
Okay. Marcia writes, what about mulching plants on slopes? How do we do it without shredded mulches? And I think the problem there is with physics, keeping the mulch where you want it. Is that what?
Yeah, well, I'll say it's a really tough issue, Marcia, and I'm struggling with it where I live because I have a very steep slope below my house in my 5 to 30 foot zone. I'm experimenting with plants as ground cover plants as mulch. I mean, plants can be mulch. They're covering the soil. So I had a tough year though, northeast of Cloverdale, and it was really hot and my irrigation was not working correctly and a lot of them died back. So my experiment didn't go that well, but I think with proper irrigation, I think that we can try to get creative with what we're doing on steep slopes. I don't know if Ellie or April or Jen or Eric, if you have other suggestions or recommendations. It's a tough issue.
I could comment that it's depending on your aesthetic and what's available. You can make mini terraces with either contouring with branches or some rocks. I mean, I've done that before. Just get a load of 6 or 10-inch rocks, and I mean, you can even use rocks sort of up in a broken way and not a straight ball. But you can actually do mini terracing. And I say that with if you've done it, it depends on the situation, but if you're in a slightly forested area and you're thinning the trees, you can peg the trees in place on the contour, you know, horizontally around the property, and that can work. But there, I mean, it's a longer conversation, but those are some ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, if you, I can almost visualize that, Ellie, with using natural stone, you know, in, you know, configurations to hold the mulch in place.
And just
that-
giving a shout out to Arbor Mulch, it does hold its structure pretty well. So it is a material that isn't, it's not gorilla hair, it's not something that just sticks to the ground. But it does sit on slopes pretty well.
Just to add to that, I was on a property yesterday with a very steep slope, and they had used arbor mulch, and there was a fair amount of it down on the lower part of the slope. But if they had, I mean, and they were working with planting that, and so the plants themselves, as Mimi was saying, I mean, even if they're, you know, low growing ground covers or shrubby plants, they can act as little dams. But it is a project. It's a thing that you have to work. You can't just put it there and leave it.
Okay. What if the soil is very compacted, Claudia, right? Should it be turned or tilled before mulching and composting? Or I've also seen people till with some mulch in it. Is that a good practice? What do you guys think?
We don't generally recommend tilling, but I understand if you have a very compacted situation or if the topsoil has been completely removed due to a fire, you know, event happening, or if it's a new home, that is possible. But putting compost and mulch is going to reinvigorate that soil. You're looking for the soil life, and then those good bacteria are going to be introduced through that process. So it should be okay.
Okay. This is one you guys taught me. What about the use of organic paper to control weeds? Right? Like cardboard is what I think you guys talked me into doing at my place.
Yes. So using cardboard and then first coming in with a compost potentially, then cardboard on top and some kind of mulch on top to help suppress weeds and also revitalize soil. It's called sheet mulching. It's a great technique. Sometimes it works better in some circumstances. But it's definitely a good thing to do.
What depth would you recommend for that? For the mulch, the compost, everything?
Depends what kind of weeds you have, or if you are trying to kill a lawn, for instance. So a couple of inches of compost, you know, if you can do at least 2 layers of cardboard, that's great. It's better to do more. It's hard to source sometimes. So what you have, and then a couple inches of mulch, and then replenishing it.
Okay. What about the ground irrigation or the PVC pipe irrigation? Somebody's asking about that. They heard that, you know, in fires, if it's exposed, it'll melt, of course. Is there research about the soil's temperature at various depths? I guess that's the fundamental question there. And I guess the curiosity is probably, at what depth can we put the plastic pipe to where it'll survive a serious fire?
Well, we
Any,
certainly know. I mean, we've had experience with PVC during the Tubbs fire being destroyed.
Yeah.
We are renovating a demonstration garden where all the PVC was destroyed during the glass fire. It's a real issue. I haven't seen any research about, number
neither.
one, how deep you can go with your PVC and how deep the heat of the fire is transmitted, which will melt it. Has anybody else seen anything in that regard? It's an interesting question.
I just know that soil tends to be the best insulator, period. So I wouldn't suspect you have to go more than like 5-6 inches and you would get pretty good protection. It's just wherever you're coming up, where
Right.
the emitters are or the heads are, that there's nothing to be done for
Melt
sure.
off, yeah.
Well, but I
would
mean,
say-
there's like the PVC in ground has been destroyed as well in fires, Eric. So it's a tough issue.
Yeah.
It also depends on how hot the fire is in any given place. I know that the angle that I come to it from is that there's certain plants that need the heat of fire in order to germinate. Like there's certain manzanita species that won't grow, and so in the hills, you could see where the fire was the hottest because the manzanita seedlings were growing back, but it was very rare patches where that happened. So I think, below 3 or 4 inches, you're probably okay as long as the fire isn't incredibly hot and severe, which would mean like right next to the house or right under a tree that's fallen, or whatever the vegetation or the fuel is above it would make the fire hotter underneath.
Mm. Yeah, I'll keep my eye open now that that thought is in my head. If I run across anything, I'll share it with the group. And ditto, I'm sure. Let's see, what about use of organic paper to control weeds in the 5 to 30-foot area? What are you guys thinking? I think they're talking about the filter paper that the landscapers use.
Or are they asking about, it sounds like it might be about the
Oh, the cardboard idea?
cardboard again.
Yeah, if you've got mulch on top of it, I don't think you're gonna have the cardboard on top. Again, it kind of goes back to the PVC in the ground question. How hot does it get under there? I doubt, honestly, it's gonna get hot enough to ignite cardboard, especially if it's moist, being in the ground a bit. Good question.
That's one thing that we left out on the answer to the sheet mulching, Jen, was that you do need to hydrate that situation. Like you can't just put it
Yes.
down and just leave it, especially this time of year. You've got to give some water. So there's a water budget that goes into the sheet mulching.
Definitely. Thank you, April.
Renee writes, we have a lot of native oaks with native toyon, which tends to grow under or very near. This is zone 2 and beyond. I love the toyon and hate to remove it, but we have a debate about cutting back toyon and how much. Your thoughts on that?
Eric, did you want to answer that?
Yeah, I'm happy to step in. I think it's just all about the fuel continuity and making it discontinuous. So if it's right underneath, we love toyon too. It's a beautiful plant. But if it's right underneath your oaks and you're putting them at risk, we obviously value oaks as well. So I would recommend the removal. But if it's a little bit further away, if you can get that kind of physical distance, then let it grow. Let it be a specimen species. It's all about kind of following the rules that we talked about in the prior webinars here.
I see.
Yeah.
So I had one that tipped over in a freak snowstorm in Cloverdale a couple of years ago. And I thought it was gone. I was really sad because the robins just throng in it when the berries are on it in fall. And it totally resprouted from the base stock where we cut it back. Jen talked about how you can coppice it or cut it back. So I'm actually looking at a neighboring toyon now that I want to maybe manage because it's in my 5 to 30, and I'm thinking about coppicing that because the other one rejuvenated. It was up like 5 or 6 feet in the first year. It was amazing. So now I'm thinking from a fuel management perspective in that zone closer to my home. I'll wait till post robin migrating and berry season, but I'll probably coppice that toyon just from a fuel management perspective, and I know it will rejuvenate really well.
Yeah, and that's a new word I learned today. So thank you guys, coppicing. I thought maybe it was spelled wrong when I first saw it. Okay. Joanna writes she wouldn't mind some irrigation drip or drip irrigation system recommendations. She's experienced way too many failed drip heads. She's beginning to favor sprinklers because it's so much easier to spot when drip is failing. But yeah, the obvious downside to that is water use. What do you guys think?
April, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. I mean, that's why in my talk, I always talk about the balance of irrigation, and irrigation for in general is challenging, especially if you live. We just were running into some issues with a lot of like at a site with a lot of extra, on a well, and then the drip irrigation is getting clogged up. So I actually, if you can, I prefer the pop-up, the low water use MP rotators, because you can see it. But we were just talking about the infrastructure being burnt. So like Mimi was saying that the PVC, so PVC can't, the structure isn't so invaded by squirrels or other, animals getting into it. So drip irrigation heads always have to be dealt with. So it just really depends on where you live and what you have. If you're converting a lawn and you have a infrastructure already of PVC and pop-up heads, and you can just switch out the tops to MP rotator heads that are lower water use. But any irrigation, you're gonna have to monitor, you're gonna have to be vigilant about maintenance around it. And so you have to change your cycles, like Jen said, every season. You need to turn it off when the rains come. You can't just put in an irrigation system and walk away is kind of the answer. If you have drip heads to the plant, you're gonna have to consistently move them away from the base of the native of the plant. So there's just no irrigation system that's not maintenance free.
So I just want to put in a plug. If you go to the UC Master Gardener Program of Sonoma County website, we have an extensive set of web pages on irrigation that hopefully can help you with your questions.
Okay. Thank you guys for hanging out. I know we're going a little bit long. We still have quite a few people in, so I appreciate you diehards hanging in there. Oh my gosh, people keep adding questions. So, how long do we have the interpreters? What do you think about rice hay as mulch? I've never heard of rice hay. I don't know what that is.
Rice straw would be a better
Okay.
word, yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, that I can picture that, I think.
That might be an Eric question.
So I was trying to look up what it is really quick. I think it's just regular straw, right? Like flat straw.
It's straw that comes from rice, and the reason that it's often used in plantings is that the seeds are not viable, or they may grow, they won't, because it's rice, it needs a lot of water, so it's not actually going to end up being a weed in your garden.
So I think it's often used in vegetable gardens. And it's just fine as long as you're outside the 0 to 5 foot zone.
Yeah.
So it's
the
also
big thing.
restoration projects, because it's like you wouldn't want to use any kind of other straw that might bring weed seeds in. But I suspect it would be a little more flammable than the kind of mulches that we're recommending, because it's very and high flashy fuels kind of.
Yeah, I'm not comfortable unless we've seen a study with making a statement about whether we think it's more flammable. So
yeah,
and I'm not sure.
The one thing didn't mean to cut you off there, Mimi, but the one thing I would say is certainly it's a thinner layer that you're putting down. It's just meant to cover and cover exposed soil, basically. So it is going to have less organic material and nutrients that'll break down and become part of the soil, basically. So to me, that would be the downside of you're missing out on one aspect, as well as I think it tends to be quite silicaceous, like filled with silica. And so it's not going to absorb as much water and hold it the way that mulch does. So pros and cons. Yeah.
Silicaceous. Now there's a new word.
Whoops.
All right. What are best technique to grow native grass to replace lawn? This one is right up my alley. Pre-propagate versus direct seeding. So I just bought some poppy seeds and some California fescue. And in my backyard, it's finally time to plant my landscaping project. and I'm getting ready to do that. So I would love to know the answer to this question as well.
Well, it can be tricky. Both techniques work. You can use use the straw that we were talking about to cover, to make sure those seeds aren't, eaten by birds.
Right.
You want to make sure that the area is properly hydrated. So if we're not getting the fall rains that we expect. And April, I don't know, do you want to add to that?
I think that's a perfect answer, and I would be cautious about the rice straw. We just finished a project where the straw pieces were too big, and so they kind of they stumped out. They kind of kept the seedlings from growing. I would definitely do a mix of, just to be realistic. I would do if you have some budget, I would add some already propagated plugs or 4 inches to that space, and don't depend on a giant amount of seed to replace a lawn, because you have to really get rid of those weeds before you see these seeds coming up. And so if you don't know your non-natives versus natives, it's really tricky to know what your California fescue is, Roberta, versus your little wildflowers.
Invasive weeds. Yeah.
And then the basic weeds. So you can it's a really tricky situation.
Yeah, I currently have no weeds. I put retaining walls and backfilled it all with fresh topsoil.
Yeah,
So,
fresh topsoil really helps a lot.
yeah, I'm just worried that the birds are going to eat them all.
The advice that I've heard is to do a small patch, start with a small patch and work your way out. Like, 5 by 5, and experiment. But April, isn't there also native grass sod that you could just put it in there?
There is. I looked at that. It's just, I don't need like a whole pallet, and
Yeah, you have to order at least 400 square feet to for an
450.
order.
Yeah,
Yeah,
450.
but there are a couple of native grass sods from Delta Bluegrass that are hit and miss, which I've talked about last week, but about 70% successful. And you just have to be willing to deal with the brownout and more water, like back to the water, like to get them established, like Jennifer said. Like if you're going to be seeding or you're going to be adding turf, a couple of years you're going to have to add more water to get them going.
I would add, I've spent a lot of time trying to grow native grasses around my place in Grayton. It really depends on your soil. It depends on whether you've got gophers. It depends on, I have the one grass that I've had success with is a Elamus triticioides, used to be Lamus triticioides. It's what is it? I'm forgetting what
A wild rye.
Yeah, creeping wild rye, and it's just going nuts.
Wow.
And it's like a mini bamboo. It's going everywhere, and I'm like wondering if it was a good idea. It's the thing that is doing the best. So, it's fun to talk about. It's fun to play with. It really is. But if you're a nerd,
and make sure you look your site up on calscape.org and know what the native grasses are to your location. Ellie has a lot of like groundwater and but if you're like up in some steep hillsides, you need different grasses. So make sure you really look up what the native grasses are that are local. Because Roberta, I think Festuca californica is a perfect probably match for yours.
It is. I looked it up. You see, you guys are training me well. I did look it up, and that's why I went with the seed, because I couldn't find the sod in the exact species that was going to work either.
Yeah.
Because I discovered that the places around here, they all use Park Avenue turf, and their species are quite limited. So I'm thinking, well, maybe I'll try seed and see what that does. Okay, last question. Do you need to use a layer of fabric under a swale? I'm curious about this as well.
What do you guys think?
I'm looking to you, April, as a landscape professional who's done so many of these.
You're a landscape professional too. So I tend to shy away from landscape fabric, but under a swale, it is a tricky situation. Eric, I mean, you could weigh in on this too. So that pretty much the only place I'll use landscape fabric is under a swale that I'm not planting. But often in a swale, we plant in native reeds and different plants. And so you'll have to cut holes for those throughout. But that's the only place I use landscape fabric if the client is like really, really, really fussy about weeds.
Yeah. Yeah. I was gonna basically agree with that. And just to say, like, once you have, if you do native plantings, if you do the reeds or the native grasses that are or graminoids, whatever it is, they're gonna create a root structure that acts almost like that weed fabric. It
Oh,
just
wow.
takes a little bit longer time. So it's all about longevity and how how patient people are.
And I'm in my areas, I have put gopher wire because gopher's my problem, but I don't actually have any weed infestations trying to come up through my, well, actually, no, I go out, it's right in front of my house, and I confess, I have pulled a few weeds, but it hasn't really been that big.
Depends, right? It just depends. Like if you have crabgrass and you sheet mulched and then you're trying to like keep weeds out, and it just depends on what your maintenance level is, like Jennifer talked about, like how much do you want to be out there? But that's the only place I use it sometimes, but I don't love landscape fabric.
Okay.
Do we do it?
Yeah, we're about a half hour over, but we had some folks hang in, which is great. So again, thank you guys for hanging in there, and thanks to everyone, whether you're still here or not, for participating and sticking with the program. This is the last of our 4-part series. Imagine they will be posted on YouTube at some point. Yeah, perfect. And special thanks to our Spanish interpreters, Annabella and Julie. Thanks so much. And thanks to the Team Resilient Landscape Coalition. You guys are amazing. Or should I say we are amazing, I
There you
guess.
go.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jen. Great
Thank you, Roberta.
Thanks, everyone. Can't wait
Nice
to
work, Jen.
night, everybody.
One
Night.
night team.
see ya.
Thanks, Jennifer. Good job.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jennifer, really good job.
Thanks, Roberta.
See you guys.